There is a strip of land in Asia that did not exist 30 years ago. It was open ocean. Fishing boats passed over it. Today, that same patch of water generates more gambling revenue in a single year than the entire United States combined. Every tribal casino, every riverboat, every slot machine in Atlantic City and Nevada put together, and it still was not enough to slow this place down. We are talking about Macau, a tiny Chinese territory just 45 minutes by ferry from Hong Kong, smaller in land area than most mid-sized American airports. In 2019, before the world shut down, Macau pulled in about $36.5 billion from gambling alone. The Las Vegas Strip, the same year, made roughly $6.5 billion. Do the math, and Macau was out earning the entire Las Vegas Strip by more than 5 times over, from a territory you could drive across in 20 minutes. Here is the part almost nobody talks about. Macau did not have the space to build any of this. The peninsula was packed, colonial buildings, narrow streets, no room for skyscrapers. So starting in the early 2000s, engineers did something that sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud. They built an entirely new district by dumping millions of tons of sand into the ocean between 2 small islands, Taipa and Cologne, and waited for it to become solid ground. That new land got a name, Cotai. And Cotai is where 7 of the most extreme casino resorts on the planet now stand. Resorts that completely rewrote what a gambling city could look like. Today, we're going deep into how this happened. The land that was fished before it was gambled on, the buildings that cost billions and paid themselves back in months, and the engineering problems nobody on Earth had ever solved before because nobody had ever tried building like this on compressed ocean sand in Typhoon Alley, on a deadline set by billionaires racing each other to open first. Stick around, because building number 1 on this list recovers its entire construction cost in under half a year of normal business. Let's get into it. Start with the reason Macau exists as a gambling capital at all. For 400 years, it was a quiet Portuguese trading post, the only European colony on Chinese soil. Gambling had technically been legal there since the 1850s, but for most of the 20th century, one man controlled every single casino in the territory. His name was Stanley Ho, and his monopoly ran essentially unchallenged for over 40 years. That changed in 2002, when the Macau government made a decision that reshaped the entire region. They ended the monopoly and opened the market to outside operators, including American giants like Las Vegas Sands, Wynn, and MGM. Within 2 years, foreign money started flooding in, and within a decade, Macau was no longer a regional curiosity. It was the biggest gambling market on the planet, and it had already overtaken Las Vegas for good. The first mega project to prove this new model worked was built by Las Vegas Sands, on that freshly reclaimed strip of land called Cotai. To create the ground it sits on, crews pumped roughly 6 million tons of sand from the seabed to fill in the water between Taipa and Cologne. Only after that land had been compacted and stabilized could construction crews drive more than 1,500 concrete piles down to bedrock to support the structure above. The resort that rose out of that reclaimed seabed was the Venetian Macao, and when it opened in 2007, it became the largest single-structure hotel in all of Asia and one of the 10 largest buildings on Earth by floor space, just under 1 million square meters under one roof. The concept was simple on paper and insane in execution. Recreate Venice, Italy indoors, inside a casino resort in southern China. Painted sky ceilings that shift from morning light to sunset without you ever noticing the transition. Indoor canals lined with gondolas, each one steered by a real gondolier trained to sing as they row. 3,000 suites, and notably, not a single standard hotel room in the entire building. Every guest gets a suite as the base offering. The project cost somewhere in the range of $2.5 billion and took about 3 years of round-the-clock construction with tens of thousands of workers on site to hit its opening date. Once it opened, the gaming floor alone started generating billions annually, and within roughly 2 years, the property had already clawed back its full construction cost. Everything after that first stretch was pure profit for a building sitting on what used to be open water. Once the Venetian proved the model, Macau's other operators stopped thinking in terms of single hotels and started thinking in terms of entire self-contained cities. That is exactly what Galaxy Entertainment built with Galaxy Macau, a resort that opened its first phase in 2011 and then kept expanding for years afterward, folding in new towers while guests were still gambling on the floors below. Galaxy Macau eventually connected 5 separate luxury hotel brands under one continuous roof, more than 100 restaurants, and enough convention space to host international trade events. But the detail that made global headlines was on the rooftop. Galaxy built a wave pool capable of producing genuinely rideable surf, multiple stories above ground level, using pneumatic systems buried beneath the pool floor that push compressed air through underwater chambers to physically generate the swell on command. Below that, a winding artificial lazy river cuts through a man-made beach built from imported and specially treated sand, engineered to feel like a real coastline despite sitting on top of a casino complex. Galaxy Macau eventually became the single highest grossing resort property anywhere in the world, gaming revenue and non-gaming revenue combined, out-earning every hotel casino in Las Vegas individually. Then there is the building that borrowed one of the most photographed landmarks on the planet and dropped it into a Chinese casino resort. The Parisian Macao opened in 2016, also under Las Vegas Sands, and its signature feature is a half-scale reproduction of the Eiffel Tower, standing roughly 160 meters tall directly in front of the property. This was not a rough copycat built for a photo opportunity. The design team worked from detailed structural references tied to the original Eiffel Tower's engineering, matching its lattice pattern and proportions as closely as the smaller scale would allow. But the ground underneath, it created a completely different engineering problem than the one Gustave Eiffel ever faced. The real tower in Paris sits on solid limestone. This version sits on reclaimed ocean sand in a region that gets hit by typhoons capable of pushing wind speeds the original structure was never designed to survive. Engineers had to sink deep concrete piles to create an artificial bedrock platform strong enough to anchor thousands of tons of steel through storms the original Paris design specifications never accounted for. The tower now hosts a nightly light show, draws millions of visitors up to its observation deck every year, and has become one of the most recognizable skyline features anywhere in southern China, all sitting on land that was underwater a generation ago. Not every standout building on Cotai belongs to an American company. Stanley Ho, the man who had run Macau's gambling monopoly for decades before it opened up to foreign competition, was not going to sit back and watch international brands take over his own territory without a response. In 2007, he opened Grand Lisboa on the Macau Peninsula, a tower shaped like an enormous golden lotus flower, wrapped from base to crown in what is reported to be over 1 million individual LED lights. When the light system runs at night, the building is visible from nearly anywhere in the city, and it was deliberately built taller than some of Hong Kong's most recognizable skyscrapers just across the water, a statement as much as a structure. The exterior petals are not decorative cladding. They form part of the actual load-bearing skeleton of the tower, which frees up the interior floors from needing supporting columns running through them. To anchor a structure like that on land shaped by decades of reclamation work, engineers had to drive the foundation dozens of meters down into solid rock beneath the surface, deeper than most subway tunnels most people will ever ride through. Inside, Grand Lisboa is famous for genuinely excessive interior details, oversized gemstones displayed almost casually in the lobby, and a restaurant near the top that has been recognized among the highest altitude Michelin-starred dining rooms in the world. If Grand Lisboa was a statement in gold and light, the building that followed a decade later was a statement in pure geometry. In 2018, Macau unveiled the Morpheus Hotel, the final project completed under the direction of architect Zaha Hadid, who had passed away 2 years before it opened. Instead of a conventional tower, Morpheus looks like someone took a 40-story glass skyscraper and carved several enormous voids straight through the middle of it, with no visible internal columns interrupting the open space where the building has essentially been hollowed out. Making that shape physically stand up required breaking the entire structure down computationally into an enormous number of individual stress points and calculating the exact load at each one, because a design with this many irregular curved surfaces cannot be engineered the traditional way, floor by floor with repeating identical sections. The steel components used to build the exoskeleton were manufactured as unique curved shapes rather than standard repeated parts, fabricated across multiple countries and shipped in for assembly with extremely tight tolerances, because pieces this irregular do not forgive manufacturing error the way a straight beam would. Every guest room inside ended up a different shape as a direct result of the flowing exterior geometry, and the building has since become one of the most photographed structures in the territory, a monument to an architect who never lived to see her own design completed. And then there is the entry on this list built for people who have zero interest in ever touching a card table. Studio City opened on Cotai in 2015 with a deliberate 1930s Hollywood theme running through every corridor, gold trim, art, deco detailing, the visual language of an old movie palace rather than a casino floor. But its real signature sits outside the building entirely. Suspended high above the ground between two separate towers is a fully functioning Ferris wheel that rotates in a figure-8 pattern, an engineering configuration that essentially did not exist anywhere else before this project. Solving that problem meant designing a wheel structure that could be supported between two buildings that move independently in wind and shift slightly during seismic activity, without transferring stress in a way that would damage either tower or the ride itself. The solution involved a cable-supported steel structure engineered specifically to handle typhoon-level winds without measurable sway. Beyond the wheel, Studio. City leaned hard into franchised attractions, and live entertainment built around an audience that had no interest in gambling at all. And in doing so, it proved something that reshaped how every operator afterward thought about the territory. Entertainment revenue could stand on its own next to a baccarat table, not just support it. There's an eighth story worth mentioning here because it shows how brutal the competition on Cotai actually became. MGM was one of the first American names to gamble on this territory, and its Macau property leaned into a very different identity than its neighbors. Instead of chasing a European theme or a record-breaking gimmick, the design referenced Macau's own maritime history, its centuries as a Portuguese trading port, with a curved glass facade meant to echo the shape of ocean waves rolling toward the coastline. At the center of the building sits a soaring atrium with a painted ceiling that stretches high enough to genuinely feel like open sky rather than a hotel lobby. The building itself had to survive the same reclaimed ground problem as everything else on this list. Foundation columns, driven deep enough to reach solid bedrock beneath compacted sand and silt, with a glass exterior engineered to withstand typhoon-force wind loads far beyond what a normal commercial tower would ever need to handle. When it opened in the mid-2000s, the property generated well over $1 billion in revenue within its very first year of operation, recovering a large share of its total construction cost in a stretch of time that would be unthinkable for almost any other category of real estate on the planet. It became one more data point proving that this reclaimed strip of land was not a risky experiment anymore. It was simply how casino development worked now. What ties every one of these buildings together is not the theme, not the country they borrowed their aesthetic from, and not even the size of the number on their annual revenue report. It is the ground itself. None of this existed as usable land within the lifetime of people still living in Macau today. Every foundation on Cotai had to be engineered around the reality that the soil underneath is not natural bedrock. It is compacted fill, sand and silt pumped up from the seafloor and left to settle before anyone could even think about pouring concrete. Every glass facade had to be rated for wind speeds most architects never have to design around, because typhoon season in this part of the South China Sea is not a rare event, it is an annual certainty. And every single one of these projects had to be built on a deadline set by direct competition because the operator next door was racing to open first and claim the same pool of visitors. Add up what these 7 resorts represent, and the scale becomes almost impossible to process in normal terms. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 to $30 billion in combined construction spending, most of it poured into a district that was literally seabed a generation ago, built inside roughly 15 years. At its peak before the pandemic, Macau's total gambling revenue alone was pulling in well over $30 billion annually, a figure that dwarfed every other gambling market on the planet, including the entire American casino industry combined across every state. Then COVID hit, and Macau's revenue collapsed almost overnight, falling by nearly 80% as China's strict border and travel policies cut off the visitor flow that the entire territory depended on. For a stretch in 2020 and 2021, Las Vegas actually pulled ahead of Macau in annual revenue for the first time in over a decade, an outcome that would have sounded absurd just a year earlier. But the recovery since border restrictions eased has been sharp. Macau's gaming revenue has been climbing back toward pre-pandemic levels year after year, and by the mid-2020s, it had reclaimed its position as the largest gambling market in the world by a wide margin, well ahead of the entire state of Nevada. The operators that own these Cotai properties are now also under government pressure to keep diversifying beyond pure gambling, investing billions into non-gaming attractions, concerts, conventions, and family entertainment, because the territory's leadership wants Macau to look less like a casino floor and more like a complete travel destination, the way Las Vegas has spent the last 2 decades trying to become. New projects continue breaking ground even now, expansions, additional hotel towers, and entertainment venues layered onto a district that only exists because engineers were willing to turn open ocean into buildable land. What makes Macau genuinely remarkable is not just the size of the numbers, it is the sequence of decisions that had to happen for any of it to exist at all. A government decision to end a 40-year monopoly. A handful of foreign companies willing to bet billions on land that did not physically exist yet. Engineers willing to solve foundation problems nobody had faced before, on soil nobody had built on before, in a storm zone that punishes any mistake. Every one of these 7 buildings represents a company betting an enormous amount of money that spectacle itself could be the product, that people would fly across the world just to stand inside a building, not only to gamble inside one. Macau took a territory smaller than most cities' airports and turned it into the most financially productive real estate on the planet, built almost entirely on land pulled out of the ocean within living memory. It did not copy Las Vegas. It looked at what Las Vegas had built over a century and decided to compress that same ambition into 15 years, on ground that had to be created before construction could even start. The question worth sitting with is what happens to a district like this over the next 15 years, when the companies running it are already being pushed to build attractions that have nothing to do with gambling at all. If you have a guess for what comes next, drop it in the comments. I read every one of them.